Hi, this is Dan Eisner here with Key Insight Coaching, and I'm back with these 7 gateways to unlocking your inner peace and potential. And today we're talking about gateway number 5, understanding the shadow effect. And I like to call this the elephant in the room because I think it's one of those things that we all sort of know about on some level, but we don't talk about very often. I think it's funny that a lot of times when we sit around thinking about human behavior, we just kind of have to scratch our head going in complete wonderment, going, what exactly is going on here? Why do we do these crazy things as human beings? And we all do things that just, don't make any sense at times. Well, one of the things that I've learned that I like to pass on to people is that we operate under a very false assumption. And that false assumption is that we are actually logical thinking people most of the time, when the truth is we are only about 10% conscious, and that's on a good day. And I think one of the signs or symptoms that illustrates just how illogical we are is the amount of time we sit around in conversation trying to figure out why people are doing these crazy things. Well, one of the quotes that one of my colleagues' husbands said last year that I really love that sort of speaks to this is, you can't insert logic where logic doesn't exist. But when we sit around trying to figure out why people do these crazy things, that's exactly what we're doing. And that just points to the truth that we're being just as illogical as the person who's doing whatever behavior we're trying to figure out. Well, this speaks to a much deeper issue. And that, of course, is that the world is not run by logic. It's actually run by emotion. Now, you might look at, say, somebody like a crooked, politician or a corrupt businessman, and you might say, well, they use a lot of logic to get the most for themselves and their, tight group of friends and colleagues, and so they use a lot of logic. Well, and that's true. They do use a lot of logic to, to get the most for themselves. But what's driving their behavior? What's beneath the surface is, of course, an unconscious emotional need to kind of get the most for themselves while forgetting about everybody else. Well, there's a lot of resources that can kind of be helpful in understanding these kind of things that happen, but one of the best that I've come across is a documentary called The Shadow Effect by Debbie Ford. There's a lot of great lessons in this documentary, but we're just going to talk about a couple of them here. And one of the most basic messages, most important messages is that we all have, or we all are, every quality that exists. Now, I'm not saying we always act out these qualities, but we all have every quality that exists is in each and every one of us. So as an example, I am a fearful person. I am. But I am also a courageous person. I'm an angry person, but I am also a calm person. I'm a hateful person, but I am also a loving person. I'm an insecure person, but I am also confident. I am hurtful, and I am also helpful. I'm sure you get the idea by now. But what most of us, we don't so much like to own our so-called negative qualities. We don't want to own up to those, so what do? Well, we overcompensate to try to cover up the fact that, sometimes we are maybe not as great as we'd like to pretend that we are. And what happens is, and I think Debbie gives a great analogy for this, is she calls it the beach ball effect. If you try to push a beach ball underwater, what's going to happen? Well, eventually it's going to pop right back up. Well, that's what happens to any quality that we try to pretend that we don't have or we try to stuff down. Eventually it's going to pop right back up. And that's whenever you see someone that's doing something that doesn't make any sense, it's simply an unconscious emotional reaction emotion that they're not dealing with that's really causing them to act out on that behavior. Another basic message of the movie that's quite profound is that we are all mirrors for each other. And this is kind of a tough one for people to swallow. And this is really, really, really tough. But the truth is, when we look at somebody else and we just really can't stand something about them, or we really get a visceral reaction, well, that's because that's a quality in ourselves that we're not really owning. The basic, another basic lesson, again, is we're mirrors for each other. So the things that we see in other people that we don't like, well, they're in us. And by the same token, the things that we really admire in other people are in us as well. Now, we might not act those qualities out all the time, but they're within us. So that's two of the most basic lessons of this documentary. Well, the key to really getting beyond this is doing what Debbie Ford calls shadow work. And that's really involves looking at our so-called dark side, shedding light on the dark so that we can actually, we're in a better position to choose how we want to be. So by learning to own every quality, again, we get to choose how we want to be. And one of my favorite examples to share with people who have substance abuse issues is one of the little problems that I have with NA and AA groups, because what do they make them say every time they go there? They have to say, I am an addict. And I'm not saying that I am an addict is not true. Certainly it might be true, but I'll ask that person, well, have you ever had a sober moment in your life? And they say, well, of course I had. So I say, by definition, aren't you sobriety also? And they'll kind of look at me and smile and say, yeah, I am. In fact, I'm sober more of the time than I am actually using. So by owning every quality, we say, I am an alcoholic, but I am also a sober person. We say, I am an angry bastard sometimes, but I am also incredibly forgiving. We say, I am a hateful person sometimes, but I am also extremely kind and loving. In other words, by looking at this from a big I perspective, like we've talked about before, by looking at it from a place of awareness, we get to choose how we want to be. That's the basic message of the shadow effect in this documentary. And I hope that you got some value out of it today. And I'm going to be back next week with the 6th gateway, which is going to speak to the law of attraction. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. And thank you so much once again for tuning in. Take care.